Welcome to Project Planning, Post-Harvest Efficiency, Profitability, and Food Safety. This section talks about flow and lean principles. How does flow and lean principles relate to the pack shed? That's what we're going to look at today. So the principles of lean. There are many different principles of lean as outlined in the Toyota Way, as outlined in The Lean Farm by Ben Hartman. If you haven't read that book, I'd encourage you to check it out. But some of these aspects of lean are to identify the value. What does the customer want? Producing really what the customer is looking for. Map the value stream. So how are you providing that value to the customer? Where is their waste, and how can you remove it? What we want to focus today is on creating flow, avoiding interruptions, delays, and bottlenecks. Intentional plan for movement. A couple other key principles of lean is to establish a pull, so not overproducing and creating just-in-time delivery or providing the resource for the customer as they need it. And one thing to keep in mind for all these principles of lean is continuous improvement. Always be looking to seek perfection. You'll never get there, but you'll definitely not get there if you're stuck in your old ways. The flow of product in an ideal situation is a smooth, single-pass flow of product. It minimizes wasted energy, and it goes from the direction of the field to the customer. In this diagram, you can see via the arrows that product comes in one door, it gets washed, it goes into a cooler, and then it gets packed, and then it goes out of the building. Also, drains and compost, so product waste gets alleviated out midstream.
One of the benefits of a linear flow like this, even if there is not everything happening at once, so it would mandate that there is a linear flow, but one of the advantages that the field has a lot of dirt in it, and dirt is coming in from the bottom of this slide, very dirty things, and then the dirt level is decreasing as you move up the slide. That is efficient in and of itself from a cleaning perspective, and it also can minimize waste, minimize contamination flow from a dirty part of the pack shed to clean.
Thanks for pointing that out. And also in this diagram, depending on what crops you're washing, it may make sense to swap the location of the packing versus the cooler in order to keep things going from dirty to a clean state. A linear flow isn't always possible, nor is it always needed. You can have a U-turn setup. So in this diagram would be much like a garage. You come in and out the same door. As you can see by the color of the arrows, dirty stuff comes in one side, it gets washed, gets packed or into a cooler, and then comes back out the other side. As we stated earlier, this could be separated a little bit between time and physical separation. So you may not be shipping things out at the same time you're bringing in dirty stuff. That just helps keep everything cleaner and your finished product as pristine as it can be. What you're trying to eliminate in both of these patterns is a crisscrossing back and forth motion. You don't want to be going from washing in one corner to packing in the other to the cooler back across the way. You really want to eliminate that spaghetti diagram in the lean. They talk about that is kind of tracing your footsteps. Where are you going? And minimizing all those excess steps. So being intentional about your movements and not going out of your way to interrupt things moving from one step to the next.
Think about dedicated space as well. There's equipment that goes with space. There's dunk tanks. There may be cleaning implements. There may be different kinds of crates. There may be things hanging on the walls. If you use the same space for a lot of different functions, that tends to accumulate clutter. So not only is the flow a very huge benefit to have clean flow, but also we have a clearer and simpler space, which allows for more efficient functioning.
When thinking about flow, whether it's straight pass or U-turn, this is a very simple case. This is assuming a single product coming in from the field that gets washed and then goes to a cooler and gets packed out. In reality, many of the growers we work with are handling many different crops and even different varieties that have slightly different pathways through this wash pack shed. It's one of the reasons many people start simply with a slab and put everything on wheels or put everything in temporarily to figure out how the different pathways work together or don't work together, and to figure out what the layout actually looks like for all those multiple pathways. It's not a spaghetti system. It's more like a forked system. But again, you can have intentional linear flow in multiple pathways, but being able to mess around with different options and figure that out before you make it permanent is helpful.
Yeah, and it's complicated too, because people, what I realize is even very experienced growers, if they're moving into a bigger space and they might have a different number of employees, et cetera, you kind of have to get into it before you really figure out the best ways to line things up.
It's another key point, that, Hans, that you just brought up is that many minds are helpful in this, particularly minds from the people who have done the work, and so bringing the crew into this thought process and planning process to think about what your flow looks like can really lead to some unexpected good ideas that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, there are growers who've done an exceptional job with that, and their crews have provided some real good insights.
So there's 3 or really 4 things that you need to think about when you're thinking about the flow inside your wash pack space. So ideally, at first, you're thinking about the flow of product. Where is the vegetables or your flowers or whatever it is coming in and out? The next one is the flow of people. Where are you and your workers coming in and out? Where are special tasks happening? Where's your harvest crew coming in for the day? Are they hanging up their jackets or clothes or gearing up to go out? Where's that wash pack crew coming in to start the day or to have a daily meeting? Where are you keeping your storage tools, your hand washing station, a break room? Are these happening in the same place you're washing vegetables, or are they in a separate spot? One example here is that you can see employees kind of come in one door and they've got the coat hook there, and then a garage door is to the right, and that's where the main product is coming in and out.
A person and a crate of produce are not the same. They are both physical things that have to move, but when planning for the flow of people, it is essential to factor in the complicated nature of people, which are both that they need clean and good flow, good physical movement as a physical body, but also that they need to have good morale, they need to feel all right, they need to be well fed, they need to not be freezing their hands off, and in short, they need to not have psychological barriers to good, efficient work.
In this example is the corner of a room dedicated to an employee break space. It's where they can crash and eat lunch, and they're not doing that on the wash pack tables, crossing paths of mixed use on the same surfaces.
When thinking about the flow of people, also think about specialization of assigned tasks for people. So, for example, if you have laying hens as well as mixed vegetables, you may want to have a portion of the crew dedicated to harvesting eggs at a particular time of the day with specific boots, and so keep keep those boots out of the wash pack area, for example, and keep those people out of the wash pack area and not harvesting at the same time that they're collecting eggs, and then have other people focus on harvesting, and maybe even a third group of people focused on washing and packing, just again to keep the separation of potential or keep the flow most efficient and minimize the sources of contamination.
That's a great point, Chris, and it also underscores the complexity. So say back to the chickens, if you have an employee that you know likes poultry, they like to hang out with chickens, focus in on them. And so not only do they get to kind of focus on that chore, but they're in charge of the risk management around it, thinking through where to put things, keeping track of the isolation of the boots and making sure things are clean. And that really engages someone's interest in that kind of specialization as well. So this is a great example of both physical and psychological flow. When you come in and to collect some tools to do a job, and you've got to do it quick, and you look at this wall, immediately your eye knows where to go. In this place, you have both. You can make a clean movement, grab the tool you need, and your mind is at ease because there's not a lot to look at. You can clearly see what is there, and it reduces fatigue in general. When you have thousands of decisions a day or a week, and looking for things all the time, you're looking for the first aid kit that's underneath 3 other boxes and your finger is bleeding. That kind of stuff adds up to fatigue. And it's really important to plan for that and think through different situations where there's a lot of stress, and planning for good organization that allows for both good physical and mental flow.
Here's an example of a tool shed that makes it easy for people to find their path to the tool shed and also to the specific tool they need. It eases the state of mental flow for the crew making decision. It is clearly not cluttered. It is very organized. You know right where things are just by looking at it, which minimizes the amount of fatigue or stress in making a decision or finding something. And it illustrates this point, this lean principle of clear seeing, being able to see everything you potentially could need and knowing right where it is.
And not having too much stuff in here. You don't need to move the shovels and the bag of fertilizer to get to that hand trowel in the back. Or when it's time to go measure out something, you're not trying to remember where you last left that tape measure. Is it in the back of the truck? Is it on the tractor? Is it in the barn? It's always in the same spot right there when you need it. So you're saving the mental clutter of trying to figure out where you last had it, as well as time trying to find your tools.
The other key point here is this is not in the pack shed. This is in a dedicated space so that anybody looking for a field tool doesn't need to go through the pack shed or into the pack shed to find it. It's in a dedicated space, a separate space.
Here's an example from Mighty Food Farm. Note the link on the bottom if you want to dig deeper into this case study. But this is a dedicated wash pack building specifically for this tool. Actually, half the building is for wash, pack, and coolers, and the back half is a CSA room where customers come and pick up their vegetables. And that's where that break room picture came from, was in the corner of the CSA room, separate from wash, pack. Here you can see the produce comes in and out that garage door on the left. And this next slide shows a little bit about what it is inside. So on this farm, they utilize a U-shaped setup. That stuff comes in and out the same door. They actually have fixed sinks on one side of the building, kind of that barrel washer in the middle, and kind of a loading zone on the right where product comes in to get cleaned. And then the coolers are in the back, and then you can see there's a door in the middle, and that goes directly to that CSA room. So things can come out of the coolers and across the room for display on customer pickup days.
And this is a great example of a lot of stuff goes on in this space. It is essential to keep flow lines organized, to keep things organized so that efficiency is not compromised.
Here's an example of a very early stage plan that Lisa at Mighty Food Farm actually presented when we first got together to start talking about her plans for either renovating an existing building to make a wash pack shed or building something new. This is a sketch Lisa had done in a notebook that were her initial thoughts on rough layout and rough sizing based on her prior experiences in a rather cramped, difficult space to work from. But this was a good example of some very early planning that really addressed the key issues that Lisa was trying to overcome. And she knew very clearly what her priorities were, and some of that was more space, easy flow, efficiency of movement, and just a comfortable space for her and her crew to work.
Now, not everybody is starting with a new space. A lot of them are working with a space that they already have. So this is an example of Last Resort's farm floor plan layout. They were a dairy barn renovation, so they had fixed outside constraints. And they're also working on scaling up a few aspects of their business. So they weren't really sure which direction they wanted to go. So locking down sinks or specific equipment, you don't really want to do. So keeping an open wash pack space is helpful. Now, a couple of things here. This was designed in actually PowerPoint. It could also be designed in Google SketchUp if you're comfortable with that program to start laying things out and laying out dimensions. This farm utilizes multiple different coolers as well as an office and a bathroom.
At Last Resort Farm, one of the things that they were working with was an existing dairy barn. And while that does present some challenges in terms of materials and finished surfaces and low ceilings, etc., it does provide oftentimes a lot of space to work with that's already laid out in a very linear fashion. So it is something we can take advantage of to utilize some of the principles we talked about earlier.
And did you mention that this has an existing floor drain with slope, as a dairy barn? I don't know if you mentioned that, but it ended up being a good setup for, how they were going to lay out that wash pack.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. That is another great benefit of a dairy barn is that they come with a large trench gutter-style drain, which is perfect for mass amounts of water or soil load in the drain for easy cleanouts. So that's a benefit. And that's part of what structured the 8x10 size coolers, because that was the space between the posts of the barn that could not be moved. Another aspect that Silas included in designing this was adding a loading dock to the side of the barn. He had some elevation to work with, so as product comes out to the left, he can go out onto a loading dock, which is covered, which is also a nice landing zone for products coming in or out.
And keep in mind that this farm is producing small wholesale, but trucks moving in and out, and a loading dock like Silas was looking for would not be appropriate for Lisa at Mighty Food, who's doing a different kind of delivery and CSA system.
Good point.
Another example of a farm layout is Route 5 Farm. They were renovating an open pole barn, so a slightly different approach. They have a concrete apron all the way around two sides of their building and is completely open on the inside. The only thing that is fixed is the floor drain in the center and the cooler in the corner. So generally, product comes in via the left or top door and gets washed in the middle, stored in the cooler, and then comes out a door on the bottom side of this picture.
And this illustrates a phase planning approach that we will talk about, where Route 5 Farm started with that 800 square feet wash pack space, and they knew they were going to need more space for all of the containers, bin management, moving stuff in and out, and that apron was added in time in different phases, and has doubled their floor space and made their production really efficient.
In one way that covered concrete apron area has really been helpful is just promoting the flow of product. So it's harvested, the wash pack may be occupied with other produce at the moment, but there's a resting spot where it can land and wait until there's space for it to be moved through the wash pack. This is one of their favorite features.
Oh yeah,
surprisingly enough, have all the work that's been done in the wash pack space. It's a simple concrete pad that's covered outside. That really is a somewhat boring use, but it allows for just space for things to rest, bins to dry.
It's all the same floor, so they can wheel everything outside to inside off pallets and floor jacks.
And you use that word wheel, and when you go there, you understand why it's so useful. And we'll get into wheels, but right there, bins are moving in and out. Things are moving all over the place on wheels, and it's incredibly efficient.
The next example is a floor plan of Footprint Farm. This is a barn and house in one. They live on the upper half. So here's an example of a little bit of a mixed use space. Product comes in on the top right corner. It gets washed and packed kind of in that area, and the cooler is to the left. And then they park their delivery van to the left there. So product kind of comes in one end and actually out the other. They've also included a workshop space in here and a bathroom. Again, one of their favorite features is that concrete apron outside, so they can set up a spray table and do a lot of the bulk washing outdoors if it's a nice day, or just that loading zone, getting stuff off the ground and landing it from the field before it comes in and clutters up the wash pack space.
Andy, there's also a covered space off the bottom in this image.
That is true. Yeah. That is not shown. They've got like an outdoor porch. And I believe they're planning to cover the apron as well, but that's an example of a phased project. Hasn't happened yet, but I could see that the framing was there to tie into that in the future.
I think one point of all this is to remember that there are sometimes spaces outside of what we tend to think of as wash pack spaces that are just as important as what's inside. And so these aprons, covered spaces outdoors that are protected from elements and protected from birds roosting, etc., can really become very, very important.
A couple of things under that outdoor porch is like a picnic table where the crew has lunch every day. That's where they can park the lawnmower or their bikes in the shade. They're really big into work-life balance, so hanging a hammock in there is important. And that's one thing that they've done off the porch as well. They worked with contractors, so they went kind of from an initial sketch into a full architectural plan. As you can see here, fully dimensioned out, ready to go, and structurally tested. So once you kind of get from that idea phase into actual building plans, it would be helpful to talk to somebody who's knowledgeable in construction and architecture to make sure everything is sound.
You know, this thing about the apron is a really key point. And one thing to think about is that growing food is mostly an outside venture. A lot of stuff happening outside. And then you're moving product into a space. And it would almost be like, not having an apron would almost be like flying an airplane to an airport, but not having a runway. In other words, there's so much movement with so much stuff between radically different spaces that it's really important to have a docking station
no terminal, no place to unload.
Right, some unloading spot. And it's helpful to think through that. I know growers that have just put a building in and don't think about the outside always regret it.
Here's an example of a simple, somewhat outdoors wash pack space, or 4 sticks and a lid kind of example. They're utilizing a concrete floor for ease of draining. They can move carts around on wheels. And a couple of things we like to point out with this photo is they've got these stock tanks, which are gray, so they're easier to visibly see when the water needs to be changed. B, they're held up on concrete blocks, which is great for figuring out the right height of what's comfortable for washing all day. So you're not hunched over all day, or you're not up on your tippy toes. So that's a really useful tool to set up. We do recommend, once you find the appropriate height, to have stands built that are a little bit more permanent or modular, because concrete blocks are hard to clean around. You can see kind of the same thing with the pallets in the back. There's pallets on there to use as a temporary table. Pallets can be easily moved around, but they are challenging to clean. So it's great for kind of staging things.
I like this picture because it really does illustrate that this is not that complicated. When growers often scratch their head and wring their hands and are like, oh, what should I do? How is this set up? How should we design this? And frankly, it's as simple as a space, a floor, an open space floor that is cleanable, dryable, lightable, and is the right temperature. It's covered often. So keeping an open space keeps the project open to dialing in the efficiency.
The other example here of sort of trying things out and adjusting them to a point where they work are the restaurant racks in the center of the left photo, where they've taken these restaurant racks and sort of they're only using half of the height and using that as a staging area where you can adjust that level, that height of where the rack actually is, very quickly and very easily. this particular farm, they have a wide range of people who are helping with harvest, different ages, different sizes. And so having a lot of different options for and flexibility for that is important to them.
So we've talked about the flow of products. We've talked about the flow of people. Next, we want to talk about the flow of water. So where is that water coming in? Is it hard plumbed via sinks or hoses? How are those hoses managed? Are they hanging? Are they on a reel? Or are they dragging across the floor? There's different ways to manage hoses, which you can reference via the link on the bottom. Having multiple hose drops around the perimeter is great. And what do you have for drainage? Do you have fixed drains off of sinks? Do you have point drains in the floor? Or do you have large trench drains in the room? This is an example of a large trench drain. And this photo shows that grate can be picked up and removed, so you can easily clean that out, clean out that sediment, also letting it dry. The photo on the left is an intentionally broken drain. So this separates the sink from the drain. So if there was a clog in the drain and that water gets plugged up, it's not going to come back up where you potentially have fresh produce. It just goes to the floor, which makes it a little bit easier to manage should an incident like that occur.
So this can be done at any scale. It can be done without any money. At least it can be started. Depending if you're a grower getting into this, you don't really have a facility, that shouldn't stop you from creating good flow and cleanable surfaces, thinking about contact surfaces in general, dedicated bins, good procedures. In this case, these are both kitchen setups, and in both of these two different kitchens, they have full-scale SOPs that are right up there. They're fine. There's a good cleaning schedule. They have washable surfaces, and they have a separation in their kitchen of time and cleaning from their other activities. Here's a little bit bigger scale, right? We're going to set up a different dedicated space, in this case outside. Both of these growers do not have covered spaces. On the left, just using some 55-gallon drums cut in half and some clamshells, and building some tables on the north side of a building with a hose hung up can serve plenty well for running a triple dunk of high-quality greens. On the right is a similar kind of setup, but out in the open. And if you look at the line there, the bathtubs, the washable tubs, they're not uniform. They maybe look a little funky, but they're plenty cleanable and durable.
So there's a couple of things about this picture that may make you scratch your head. You can see they're using bathtubs as cleaning containers, which when you think about it, are totally safe to use. They're designed to be easily cleaned. They're a nice, big, smooth, durable surface, as long as they're thoroughly cleaned from the previous use. Another issue here is you can see there's a large puddle right where the person would be standing. So having open water like this and not having good drainage could pose a problem. They also don't really have a loading zone on either side of their line. So if they're carrying their produce in, they're most likely setting it on the ground. And that could be eliminated even just with a pallet, just to keep those harvest containers off the ground and reduce any risk of getting them dirtier than they were to begin with.
But this does illustrate the point that you really don't need tens of thousands of dollars to come up with an efficient and food-safe production line.
The picture on the left also has a couple of things that are probably worth pointing out. One is that the tubs are cleanable. The blue tubs are made of a plastic material that is smooth and cleanable. The other thing this grower has done is using also a cleanable basket, a fish basket, the orange basket there, that is also cleanable. And you can see that he's come up with a way of hanging them up to keep them off the ground, either when not in use or when draining greens out of water. The other thing is you can see that the hose is hung up off the ground as well in two places. So And lastly, it'd be easy to overlook this, but those tubs are also kept up off the ground, both from an ergonomic benefit, but also to keep those surfaces away from the ground more generally.
Having a small setup like that is easy to just flip those blue tubs over. Being outside, that way you don't have to worry about bird poop getting in them. Obviously, you're going to inspect them and wash them before use, but that would be easy to manage. Kind of like the outdoor picture on the right. They have no roof, so bird pressure may be an issue. That being said, in this picture, I don't see any trees around, so maybe birds aren't an issue, but that's something to be mindful of with an outdoor uncovered workspace.
The other point to keep in mind whenever reusing something that has been used for a prior purpose, always make sure it's thoroughly cleaned, inspect it to make sure it can be cleaned. A bathtub with large cracks in it or chipped paint or chipped enamel could present a problem down the road. So making sure that you thoroughly understand what the prior use was, that you've cleaned it thoroughly between that prior use and what you're going to use it for, and that it will be sustainably cleanable.
Thanks for watching this session of Project Planning for Post-Harvest Efficiency, Profitability, and Food Safety. We hope you're getting a lot out of it and learning things that you can apply to your farm. If you did learn something and do implement something on your farm, let us know. Or if you have a suggestion or a comment of something you've done, we'd love to hear it. So go ahead and comment below or send us an email at producesafety@uvm.edu. Thanks for watching, and I hope you watch the next video.